Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The JAYREELZ podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits. The descent of summer is here as we're officially 10 days away from autumn, but the ascent of another podcast is set to take place with all that's transpired in the world of sports, as this is the JAYREELZ podcast with your host, JAYREELZ. For my first timers, welcome aboard, and for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle, or even as early as this past Monday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And now that we're getting that much closer, as I mentioned just a few seconds ago, a week from this coming Sunday, it will officially be fall. And with that, the following Sunday will be the final day of the baseball season. And not that we've had some major developments transpire over the last few days, but there has been a team that I don't want to say has been laying in the weeds, but let's face it, they've kind of come out of nowhere to prop themselves up. And as I say this right now, watch them go belly up and put a jinx on them, because for as well as they played, and yes, if you're following baseball, there's a lot of people that have given them credit, headlined by the manager AJ Hinch, who knows his way around winning. You want to say cheating or non-cheating, dating back to those Astro teams that won a World Series back in 2017, where he was the manager of. But the Detroit Tigers, what a phenomenal job that they've done here, especially over the course of the second half, where they've thrusted themselves into the AL wildcard picture. Now, as crazy as it is to even say this, let alone think about it, but that division, you could arguably say that is probably the toughest one in the sport. And who would have thought that the AL Central would have been any factor in the playoff / wildcard mix, where you have four teams that are battling it out, not necessarily for a division, because the Tigers are nowhere near the top of the AL Central, but when you have four teams that in all likelihood, three of them are going to come out of that division, and the Tigers are certainly making their case to see whether or not that they could kind of sneak in through the back door. Now, the Twins, who are currently 3 games ahead of them in the standings, and they have no games against one another. So the Tigers and Twins, they're done for the regular season. Although the Royals and Tigers, they have a matchup, I believe, the following week, which will be interesting. But they are currently 4.5 games. And right now, let me take a good look at it. 4.5, 4 and a loss, which is good, because I believe that the Tigers have a game in hand on the Royals, which they do. But that's for 10 days from now. But when we take a look at what the Tigers have done, they've been on an incredible roll to where they are 3 games back of the Twins for that wild card spot, the final one in the American League. And who would have thunk that when you have guys on the team who aren't offensive powerhouses, I understand Riley Green is your best offensive player, and you want to even take a look at a couple other guys on the team that we would have thought that would have been at the forefront of their lineup. When you talk about Spencer Torkelson, who was a top prospect a few years ago, number 1 ranked in the sport, who has done absolutely nothing in the Motor City since he's been a major leaguer. And then when they signed Javier Baez to that big contract, 6 years, $140 million after his short stint with the Mets in 2021, a lot of people thought with his defense, his flair, and even with his bat, I understand he's a very streaky offensive player, those would be guys at the top of the food chain when it comes to their lineup. But that has not been the case. Those 2 guys have been absolute busts. Riley Green, like I said, day in and day out is your offensive threat in that lineup. Matt Vierling, who's leading the team in hits. Colt Keith is another guy that's added some spunk and some spark into this lineup, but no one is going to confuse this team for the 84 Tigers 40 years ago, where they won the whole thing, got off to that 35-5 start, as we all know. But the Tigers, and even with their pitching staff, we know that Tarek Skubal is a stud. He's probably going to win the AL Cy Young Award winner. He's had a monster year, and kudos to him, and even for the Tigers for not trading him, which I'm sure they would have gotten a boatload during the trade deadline, but they figured, no, this is our guy that's going to be a big cog as far as their ace, and you need an ace in this league if you're going to do anything. And considering what he's done this year, and you even take a guy like Kenta Maeda, who is a veteran, and a guy that knows his way around, considering he had pitched for the Dodgers and even with the Twins over the last couple of years. No one's going to mistake him for Hideo Nomo or for a dominant starter, but he's a guy that can eat up innings, a guy that knows his way around, towing the rubber and making sure that he tries to get some length in these games. And then when you look at a guy like Jack Flaherty, who they got during the trade deadline, and a lot of people thought that that was going to be a throwaway, considering that the Tigers weren't even part of this wild card mix at the end of July. And here they are, Flaherty, obviously with the Cardinals, and then last year got that taste of the postseason with the Orioles. So this is a team that a lot of people probably can't pick out of a lineup. And even with guys like Casey Mize, he was another guy, number 1 overall pick many years ago, which was supposed to be that stud to lead this rotation. And he's had a lot of injuries. He hasn't really blossomed into the guy that they thought they were getting when they drafted him many years ago. And even the back of their bullpen, although it's steady, not spectacular, when you're looking at their closer, Jason Foley, and even their setup guy, Tyler Holden, who has a bunch of holds. I guess that's apropos considering his last name. So again, this Tiger team isn't really star-studded, isn't really a team that's going to jump out of the page, but they have certainly done that, especially as they've gotten into September with that 3-game deficit that they do have. They have a final game against Colorado, which they're looking for the sweep, and we know Colorado has been toast pretty much since the All-Star break. And right now with 4 in a row, they do have the Orioles coming into their building this week, and the Orioles, boy, they have really hit the skids. Who knows? Maybe the Tigers will catch them at the right time and maybe win 2 out of 3 to inch a little bit closer when it comes to this race. But give it up for what they've done. And I don't think they're going to make it when it's all said and done. This would be a just sprint to try to get to that final spot. And when you have a team that's been as hot as they have, and when you have come back from that huge deficit and should have done some more homework from the standpoint of how far back where they were from the wild card spot, even as early as, I'll go back and say August 31st, which was not even 2 weeks ago. And here they are. Now, are they going to make a push? I think they are, but are they going to get that 6th seed? Are the Twins, who have been up and down, now they're trying to get themselves a little bit of a winning streak here. But for the Tigers, hopefully this is something that even if they do fall short, they could build on. Similar to the Orioles 2 years ago, because if you recall, they were under 500 right around the All-Star break, and then they went on that stretch where they were on the fringe of making it into the postseason and trying to get that final wild card spot, but they fell short. And then last year, obviously, had the big year, regular season that is, winning 101 games, and then they got swept by the Rangers en route to a championship for Bruce Bochy and company. So maybe they're going to follow that blueprint if they do fall short, and they'll have at least this back end of the schedule and the second half of the year to build on to next year. Maybe they could procure some players, whether via trade or free agency, to bolster their lineup and their rotation, or maybe even their bullpen for that matter. But kudos to them. They have done a phenomenal job. Give it up for A.J. Hinch. He's a guy that a lot of people had a big, giant question mark, although he had a ton of talent there in Houston. And yes, we could talk about the garbage cans and the sign stealing and winning the World Series in 2017. But he has done a masterful job because, as I just detailed, what their offense looks like, even their pitching, they got a stud at the top of the rotation, which is a boon for any manager. But the rest of the rotation is kind of, piecemealing it together with guys like Maeda and Flaherty and Mize, who's trying to find his way, and a bullpen that, yes, they've been able to gel and been able to at least put themselves in a position to where they are now trying to see if they could get that final leg over the course of these next 16 games to see if they could somehow, some way get into the hunt for Red October. But because I haven't shown them a lot of love, and rightfully so, only because they were not a part of this mix as early as a couple of weeks ago, but here they are. Now, will they run out of gas? Who knows? Maybe I'll throw, not that I'm trying to throw a hex on them, but maybe the hex is on, considering now I'm throwing bouquets at them and watch them lose to Colorado and then lose 2 out of 3 to Baltimore, and the Twins will do well over the weekend to where when we return on Monday, they'll be, instead of 3 games back, they'll be 5 games back. And when you're 5 games back with about, off the top of my head, 12 or 13 to play, that is going to be insurmountable. So let's see what the Tigers are going to do here, as one more time, they have done a stupendous job to get themselves even in the discussion to see if they could be a threat and maybe even eke out that final spot over the Twins. And I'll stick with the AL for right now before I turn my attention to the National League. As far as the wild card, and I'll talk about that now and then go to the divisions, in particular the AL East. Now, the Royals, it's either the Royals or the Yankees when it's all said and done to get that 4th seed. But you have the Royals, who just lost 2 out of 3 to the aforementioned Yankees. Lost a tough one there last night in extras, where you had the scenario of Jazz Chisholm getting the walk-off single to secure that series. And now the Yankees have won back-to-back series here. But for the Royals, they currently have a 1-game lead, game and a half over the Twins. And right now, the Twins do have a game in hand. So something to think of as we head into the weekend. And then you have the Tigers, who are 3 back. Yes, can we talk about even the Red Sox and Mariners, who are 4 back? You can't forget them. They're still part of this mix, but because that the Tigers have leapfrogged over them, and with the stretch that they've had and everything that I just accounted for, you have to give all of the credit to the Tigers at this moment as more of a threat to the Twins for that final spot. But as far as the wild card, that's what you have there. I don't know if the Red Sox or the Mariners are going to have enough to push themselves. And the Red Sox have a 4-game series here in Yankee Stadium over the weekend. And with the Yankees starting to get their mojo a little bit here, you wonder whether or not the Red Sox, and they're going to have to win a series. They're going to have to win 3 out of 4 to keep pace. They can't split here. The games are starting to check off of the schedule, and now you're approaching, by the time you get to Monday, you're going to be less than 2 weeks away from the end of the season. So the Red Sox, let's see if they could steal 3 out of 4. And they played the Yankees well this year, so who knows, anything can happen. But for the wild card there in the American League, that's what you have. And when we take a look at the AL East, because that's the only division that we're looking at, even with the Guardians and talking about the AL Central, they are 5 in the loss, 4.5 over Kansas City at this moment. So you would think they're going to be home free. So I'm not even going to include that race. And to me, the Mariners, and they've been floundering. They have not really been able to be consistent, considering that the Astros, they've hit the abutment a little bit here, as they have lost 2 games to the A's. And given up, the A's have actually played pretty well here and have gone above and beyond what a lot of people have thought going into the season. This is going to be their last go-around in Oakland, as we know. They're going to play the 3 years in Sacramento before they go to the desert and play in Las Vegas, as everybody's expecting. But Oakland, which a lot of people thought they were going to be a 50-win team or somewhere around that, obviously they've been a lot better. Not to say that they've been a good team, but a lot better than a lot of people thought coming into this year. So give it up for what the A's have done to play spoiler to the Astros, but they're going to be fine in the West, as they currently have a 4 in the loss and 3.5 games lead over the Mariners. And in the AL East, that's what it's going to boil down to. Yankees currently have a 2-game in the loss, a 1.5 games ahead, and the Yankees have a game in hand. So they certainly have the advantage here to win a division. And for the Yankees, as I mentioned, with the Red Sox coming in, and then Baltimore having to go to Detroit, which that could be a little bit tricky considering the Tigers are on fire. This coming weekend could be telling as to where this may lead down the road, considering that the Orioles do come to the Bronx not this coming week, the following week, which will be the final week of the Major League season. And we know it's been tooth and nail. We know it's been nip and tuck here between these two teams. And would I be shocked, even if the Orioles, let's say come Monday, are still within a game, half game, or 1.5 games? Now, they'll actually be even because the Yankees have a 4-game series. So that's where the game in hand will come in. So after tonight's game, they'll pretty much, and then obviously you get through the weekend, they'll be even as far as games played. So you won't have any games in hand at that point. But this will be an interesting weekend for both of these teams to see if the Yankees can get some separation, considering the schedule favors more the Yankees right this very second than the Orioles. So that's going to be one to watch, especially because they have those 3 games in the Bronx. And if they are within, I'm going to say a game, because if, let's say, the Orioles go into Yankee Stadium 2 games behind the Yankees at that point, they're going to have to sweep in order for them to get to first place. And even if the Yankees just win one game, they will still have an advantage going into the weekend where all they need to do is just win a couple of games and the magic numbers will favor the Yankees at that point. So, and let me take a look too at that, when that schedule is going to take place or when those 3 games, if it's going to be a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday or Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. The series at Yankee Stadium is going to be Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So after a day off, and it's interesting because the Yankees, after the series against the Red Sox, they have to go on a West Coast trip. Could you even imagine? 3 in Seattle, followed by 3 in Oakland. So they'll have the day off Monday after coming back from the West Coast, and that's a late trip for them. And who knows how that's going to be. Seattle's going to be fighting for their playoff lives, and Oakland, they're going to continue to play spoiler. So very interesting to see how this is going to shape up with that AL East race. But it all starts tonight there for the Yankees as the Red Sox come to town. And in the Orioles, they just finished losing 2 out of 3 to the Red Sox in Boston and will have the day off before going to Detroit. So maybe they'll regroup and see where they stand come tomorrow there in Motown. Now, as far as the National League goes, I know people are going to be, all right, JAYREELZ, where are we at here with 2.5 weeks to go with your beloved Mets? I know people have been getting in my ear saying, hey, you guys have a good shot. Yesterday was their biggest win by far. They were getting no hit in the game into the 9th inning by a guy that nobody's ever heard of. And the crazy thing is about this particular pitcher, and it's a guy that was on nobody's radar here as early as what? I would say 2 weeks ago. Bowden Francis was a guy that going into yesterday's game, or really into the 9th inning of yesterday's game, had pitched no-hit baseball into the 9th inning in 2 of his last 4 starts. And yesterday, it looked like, even with a slim 1-0 lead, it looked like the Mets were going to just bow down and have to leave Toronto with a day off today to head to Philadelphia with a big 3-game series against the Phillies. And what happened? 9th inning started with Francisco Lindor hitting a home run and just even, I'm not going to say cement, because there's a guy in LA that looks like he's maybe not a runaway winner, but is certainly going to be a strong favorite to win the MVP. And a one Shohei Ohtani, and I'll get to him in a little bit later on. But for Lindor to hit that home run, and that just sparked, and usually solo home runs, even in a 1-0 game to tie, certainly doesn't start any rallies. But what was that? Next thing you know, they're walking the ballpark, and Francisco Alvarez topped it off with a 3-run homer to make it 6-1. They ended up winning 6-2, and the Met magic continues here. And it's interesting because I look at this Met team, it's similar to the 2015 team. And I get it that 2015 team went on to win a division. And granted that the trade in the middle of the season when they brought in Yoenis Cespedes, and granted that we have Lindor, who's been a part of this Met team now. This is his 4th year when you think about it. But for Lindor, who's playing at that MVP level and got the biggest hit there to start that rally, which is very rare. Home runs do not start rallies. But for everything that he's contributed throughout this stretch from May 30th to yesterday, where they've had the best record in the sport, and for how the Mets have played here, even though they're chasing a wild card spot and not the division lead, it's fascinating to think that this team has come out of nowhere, similar to the Tigers in that regard. And even though I get it that because of their second half stretch, and think about this, people, 2 weeks ago today, they were 4 back of the Atlanta Braves for that final wild card spot. 4. Now, it helped that the Braves were in Philadelphia to play the Phillies and the Mets were going to Chicago to play the White Sox. And at that point, they cut that deficit to 1 that Monday. And ever since then, they have been back and forth. Braves have taken the lead. They've been flat-footed ties. Now the Mets have taken the lead. And we would think that that's how it's going to be from here on out until the Mets have to go to Atlanta in a very similar situation to Yankees-Orioles, as they're going to battle it out for the AL East. But the difference is, whomever wins that series in the AL East, both of those teams are going to the playoffs. Whereas with Mets-Braves, one of those 2 teams are not. So let me just pull this up real quick before I even get to the Mets schedule this weekend. We know they're playing Philadelphia. But the Mets are going to Atlanta, and that's going to be a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday series, which is good because it kind of mirrors the Yankee series here from a local level, to where both of those series are going to be played at the same time on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So it's not going to offset where one series is going to start Monday through Wednesday and the other's Tuesday through Thursday. So that's a good thing. But for the Mets, what more can I say about this team? They've been able to piecemeal it together in their own right with their pitching staff. When you have guys like David Peterson, although he didn't pitch well there on Tuesday night, but he's been just outstanding. Same for Sean Manaea, who yesterday 6 2/3, another stellar start. Luis Severino, who has also been more than what the Met fan could have ever imagined. And Tyler McGill, he's been so-so, but he's contributed. Jose Quintana, I know he's a guy that will surprise you one start and pitch well, and just when you think he's going to pitch well in the next start, he gets batted around, and he's going to start in Philadelphia tomorrow. So that could be a little bit dicey because, if he's not hitting his spots, chances are it's going to get hit the other way, if not over the wall, but in the gaps. And then their bullpen, even with bringing in guys like Ryan Stanek and, Diaz, you only hope from here on out he can return to that 2022 form. You keep your fingers crossed there. But what more can I say about this Met team? I mean, they've been playing over their heads. They've been on this stretch here over the last 3 months where they've been, I'm not going to go as far as saying dominant, but they have been spectacular under their first-year manager, Carlos Mendoza. But now they have to continue to play this way. Philadelphia is not going to be easy. They're going to go into that series, I'm sure, thinking that they're probably just going to win one of those games. And let me take a look at the pitching matchups, come to think of it. Now, they're going to face Aaron Nola, who's pitched against the Mets pretty well here over the last couple of years, but they're not going to face Zach Wheeler. They're not even going to face Ranger Suarez. So they're looking at the bottom part of their rotation. So maybe the Mets could eke out a series win and try to keep themselves afloat, where Atlanta, they're going to have the Dodgers come in to town starting tomorrow night for the first of 4 games. It's a wraparound series from Friday to Monday. So that does bode well. Even if the Mets trip up here in Philadelphia, the Dodgers, obviously, who are in a stretch where they're going to try to see if they can overtake the Phillies to get the 1 seed to have home field throughout in the National League. I don't know how imperative it is for that organization, the team, etc., for them to try to push for that, considering that the Brewers are not going to flex or even threaten to see if they can get one of those 2 seeds, as they're a few games behind. But let's see how this is going to play out. If you're going to ask me, 100% honesty, full transparency, as cynical and as jaded as I've been about this team over the years, and everybody knows, it's going to, and probably in all likelihood, will come down to that series in Atlanta. Because after these games in Philadelphia, they have 3 against Washington and then 4 against Philly to close out their regular season home schedule. Now, those games are going to be tricky. Atlanta, I have to see who they're going to play over the course of that stretch. As a matter of fact, I'll pull up their schedule now, because after those 4 games that they play against the Dodgers, they will have to go to Cincinnati. Then they play at Miami before the Mets come in. And they do have the Royals that they're going to host that final weekend of the series, where, who knows, the Royals may need those games, as we just talked about, as far as the American League playoff picture goes. So a very light schedule underneath, where after the Dodgers, it's Reds and the Marlins, who they always beat up on. Where Washington, all right for the Mets, but then 4 against the Phillies. And quite honestly, now that I think about it, it may come down to that 4-game series at home. Because let's say if it's no harm, no foul here over the weekend, where let's say the Braves and Dodgers split the 4, and I can't even say the Mets are going to win 2 out of 3, but let's say if they do win 2 out of 3. Now you have the Reds coming in with the Braves, and then, or as you say, they're going to go to Cincinnati, so who knows? Maybe the Reds will play spoiler and be pumped up to play the Braves at that time. But now once you get past that series and you have the 4-game set with the Mets playing in Philadelphia, that could be interesting, because then the Braves go to Miami, and that could be where they fatten up here. And who knows? Do the Mets go to Atlanta trailing by a game, 2 games? Because similar to the Oriole-Yankee scenario, I feel that it would be best for the Mets to at least be 1 game behind going into Atlanta. If they're 2 games behind, they're going to need to sweep. And that's all there is to it. So do I think the Mets are going to hang on here? And obviously, I don't have a crystal ball to predict that, but what does my gut tell me? Despite all of my 37 years of no titles, 37 years of disappointments, 37 years, maybe not of full misery, but yeah, 99 losing to the Braves, 2000 losing to the Yankees, 06, what happened there with the Cardinals in the LCS, the collapses in 07 and 08 versus the Marlins of all teams. I could go through the whole laundry list of the scars that I have on my body when it comes to this team. But do I think that they're going to hang around here over the course of the next 2.5 weeks? I think they do. But these series against the Phillies are going to be telling. Even with the Dodgers this coming weekend, which that's going to be a test for Atlanta. And that's how I look at it. To me, it's an absolute must that the Mets can be no far back than one game heading into Atlanta a week from this coming Tuesday. And that's it. If you could guarantee me that, come Tuesday, whatever that date is, with the 24th, I would sign for it in blood. Anything less than that, I wouldn't, because I don't think the Mets won't make it to the postseason. Now, will they be in a flat-footed tie or ahead? You know I would take that. I would sign for that and maybe even give one of my limbs, proverbially speaking. But we'll have to wait and see to get to that point. I do think they'll hang around. I do think they'll be a part of what's been transpiring here over the last few weeks. But to me, what's going to be big is, all these games are big. Who are we fooling? But next Thursday, a week from today, I'd like to see where the Mets and Braves are at then, because that's where it's going to be telling. Because I think if the Mets have a little bit of a lead, let's say if they have a 2-game lead, and that would be huge. But let's say they do have a 2-game lead going into that weekend series at home against Philadelphia, where the Braves are playing the Marlins. Where we're going to be at then at that time? Because we would think that the Marlins are going to probably just bow down, Braves will sweep, and then what do the Mets do against the Braves? Because if they do sweep, if they get those 3 games and the Mets split, then guess what? You'll have a tie there for first place or for the wild card spot heading into that series. And if that's going to be the case, then fantastic. And if they're a game behind, all right, I'll have to deal with it, live with it, but you know what? I'll take my chances. One more time. If it's 2, or dare I even say 3 games back, forget it. It's over. Because I'd be shocked if the Mets were to be able to sweep down 2 games back or even 3 games back to draw even or take a 1-game lead going into that final series of the year. And the National League, that's all I got, because the other wildcard teams, I'm not even going to mention the Cubs. I know that the Cubs are still mathematically alive, and we have to include them as far as maybe being a team that if they do start to, as a matter of fact, they're 5 games back. They're 4 games behind both actually, let me regroup here. They're 5 behind the Mets and 4 behind the Braves. So, and who do the Cubs play this weekend? Let me see. That will be telling. All right, now they go to Colorado. And this is after they won 2 out of 3 in LA. So let's see where the Cubs are at Monday. Right now, they're in a hole that they can't dig themselves out of. They're going to have to sweep. No 2 out of 3s for the Cubs from here on out. So we'll see where the Cubs are at Monday. But we all know that the divisions are over throughout the National League. We know about the Brewers. They're already putting their feet up. The Phillies have an 8-game lead over the Mets and 9 over the Braves. So you can forget about that. And even in the National League West, where things have settled down to the point where the Dodgers have a 5-game lead over Arizona and a 6-game lead over San Diego. So the division is going to be wrapped up there. So your only races are who's going to win the AL East, the Tigers and what they've done here, and Braves-Mets. That's it. And I said past September 15th, you may have a graveyard when it comes to Major League Baseball, but you have a couple of things to hang your hat on. And it's good because baseball needs it, especially when it gets to October, because right now everybody is zeroed in on the NFL and college football. And before I get to that, some news and notes throughout baseball. A couple that I failed to mention on Monday, so my apologies. I know it was very NFL-centric there on Monday's podcast if you didn't listen to it. But a couple of things I want to bring up. You have the Dodgers looking to see if they could get that final push here, not only to win a division, but to get healthy, where you have Tyler Glasnow, who could be coming back to the rotation this weekend, and then Yoshinobu Yamamoto had a very short start a couple of nights ago, 4 innings, pitched pretty well, 3 hits, 1 run, no walks, and 8 strikeouts. In fact, started the game with strikeouts of his first 4 batters. So Yamamoto, as he's trying to ramp up here to get to the end of the regular season, because we would think that he would start game 1 in the division series and let's see how Yamamoto is going to perform, because he's going to be the one guy that a lot of people are going to put a spotlight on. And I get it. He's been on the shelf almost 3 months. And for him to make his return now, it is going to be highly anticipated to see what this pitcher is going to do once we get to October. So that was the first news of note that I wanted to bring up here. But a couple of other things that happened over the weekend and even into Monday, which I failed to bring up. Shohei Ohtani, now he had hit his 46th home run a few nights, I believe it was on Sunday, and then hit his 47th there last night in a win over the Cubs. And now he's just 3 homers away and 2 stolen bases from being 50-50. So we would think that nobody in the history of the sport has ever done that. And we would think Ohtani's going to do that. Now, a lot of the focus with this MVP, talking about Lindor as I introduce him back to this discussion. Now, for Lindor to do what he's done, and remember, this was a guy that in early June was batting .210 and batting under the Mendoza line in the middle toward the latter part of May. And here he's at what, .268, which still isn't great, but you gotta at least throw some bouquets and give him his flowers for what he has done throughout the course of this stretch from May 30th to today. But let's face it, even as dyed-in-the-wool, blue and orange, pom-pom Met fan that I am, this is Ohtani's award to lose. And at the end of the day, does it all mean a thing when it's all said and done? I get it. So when you get to the middle of November, you want to see who's going to win the MVP. And all right, Ohtani, he's going to win it. And especially if he gets to 50-50, where nobody's ever done it. And I love the Mickey Mantle quote of 1988 when he was asked once Jose Canseco had done it. And when they asked Mickey Mantle, who was always a 30-30 guy and had never made it because he had the bad knees there that he suffered in the 51 World Series, as a lot of people may or may not know, trying to catch a fly ball where he slipped on the sprinkler that was out there, the cover of where the sprinkler would be back in the day to nourish the outfield grass, and he slipped on that and shredded his knee and was never the same as far as him being that base running threat. Well, when he was asked about 40-40 Jose Canseco, he said, well, please, if it was that important, I would have done 50-50. And here it is, you're going to have Shohei Ohtani is on the cusp of doing that. So we would think that Ohtani, again, he's going to be a slam dunk, and I would think just a very strong favorite to win the award, although there's a lot of people that think because Ohtani's just a DH and he's not pitching, whereas Lindor, whose WAR is, depending on where you're looking at it, his WAR is higher on Fangraphs over Ohtani because he plays the field, the defensive runs that he saves, etc. But then there's another faction where he does lead in WAR, Ohtani. So, and not to split hairs there because I'm not a big proponent of WAR, and I get it. This is analytics in 2024 with baseball. But we would think that Ohtani, when it's all said and done, is going to win the award, and rightfully so. But when we take a look at a couple other things, I know the big talk here in New York with Jason Dominguez, the Martian, being brought up with Alex Verdugo struggling here throughout the course of the second half of the season, and Dominguez, who contributed a hit a few nights ago. Let's see where that's going to lie here over the last couple of weeks of the season. But I thought that it was a no-brainer to bring him up, but the only reason why they were hoping that Verdugo would continue to snap out of it was because if you bring in Dominguez and he flops, and then you got to ask Verdugo to go back in the lineup, and you know Verdugo's going to be disgruntled knowing that he's had his playing time compromised, so that was going to be a big deal. But right now, it seems as if there's still waters on that front. And then you have, speaking of the Mets, you don't have Jeff McNeil. I forgot to mention that the other day. He broke his wrist while he was trying to pull his bat back from a bunt, 4 to 6 weeks. So chances are, even if the Mets make it to the postseason, you're probably not going to see him in the lineup. And he's had a better second half, but overall 238, not good when it comes to him. And then you had Matt Chapman, who signed a long-term deal with the Giants, 6 for $151. So that came as a surprise as you're getting into September toward the latter part of the year where you thought, all right, I believe he signed a one-year deal and was looking to get the big payday. But his numbers, I guess maybe, and I haven't really studied Chapman, but he probably likes the Bay Area. He probably thought, hey, let me just stay here. I'll have a very handsome contract. He is going to make $30 million a year. So he stays with the Giants. And then lastly, Wade Boggs, the longtime Red Sox, of course, won a World Series with the Yankees there in '96, has announced that he has prostate cancer, 66 years old. We all know his credentials, big-time hitter. He and Tony Gwynn during that era were the best hitters. And Boggs was fantastic, 5-time batting champ. I think for my from my eyes, Gwynn was a better hitter. Won 7 batting titles, I believe, off the top of my head. Actually flirted with 400, as we all know, in the 94 season, but that was cut short due to strike. But thoughts, prayers go out to Wade Boggs as he tries to beat Prostate, as he announced there over the weekend. That'll do it for baseball. Wait, let me talk about the schedule real quick. I know I've gone maybe a little bit longer than normal, but of course, baseball, I haven't really opened up the books and gone fully into baseball here over the last couple of weeks, especially with football being here. But here's your schedule. 4-game series, as we've talked about here. Tampa at Cleveland. So just to keep them in mind. Texas at Seattle, where Jacob deGrom will actually pitch tomorrow. So I'm sure that's going to be highly anticipated, especially for the Met fan from afar. So we'll see what's going to happen there. Excuse me, but other series, we already know what they are. Mets and Philadelphia, as we know. Atlanta and the Dodgers, a big one there. Baltimore, Detroit, Yanks, Red Sox. Casey's in Pittsburgh because of the race there. Minnesota's hosting Cincinnati. That we have to pay attention to. And other than that, Milwaukee at Arizona. San Diego, who are they playing this weekend? Are they on the road? Why don't I see San Diego here? San Diego. Oh, they're in San Francisco. All right, so they'll be in the Bay Area. So that's what you have there. And one other thing I just want to throw in, now that I come to think of it. If the Mets do happen to win the final spot in the wild card, just think about this. Their final series after Atlanta of the year is in Milwaukee, which is kind of ironic because to start the year, Milwaukee was at Citi Field, and how the season bookends with the Brewers, which I found fascinating, to bookend their season starting and ending the year with the Brewers. But just hold on to your hat there, because if the Mets do happen to win that final wildcard spot, the likelihood of them playing the Brewers for right this very second looks like that's going to be the case, if that were to be the case, baseball gods, if you're listening to me. So the Mets will actually be in Milwaukee not only for the weekend, but for the start of the following week, because they'll have to play the best of 3 there in Milwaukee. So just keep that in mind, and hopefully by me saying that, I probably just jinxed it, knowing that no guarantees, people, but let me move on, because who knows? Maybe I just put the hex on my beloved team and I'll be kicking myself in the rear end at that time. All right, let's put on the helmet and shoulder pads. This is a dual threat here with the football. And now you have a scenario in college football where the Pac-12, which is pretty much disbanded, you only have Oregon State and Washington State as the 2 teams hanging on there in the Pac-12. We all know that the UCLAs, the USCs, the Washingtons, the Oregons, and among the like, Stanford, everybody's just decided to splinter and go elsewhere. Well, guess what? For whatever the reason, based on some news that has come out here over the last 12 hours or so, the Pac-12, which is now the Pac-2, could actually be the Pac-6 by the time we get to the 2026-2027 season. Because in the Mountain West, when you have Boise State, Colorado State, San Diego State, these are all the states, by the way, when it comes to the teams that are going to defect here. And the last team being Fresno State. So all those teams, they have put in their bid. They have announced that they're going to depart and become a part of the Pac-12 in the next couple of years. So who knows? The Smurf turf there in Boise State will be a part of the Pac-12 with Oregon State, Washington State, etc. And who knows if other teams from those smaller conferences will also do the same to kind of fortify the Pac-12. Now, of course, you're not going to upstage USC, UCLA, Oregon, all those teams that I mentioned. But at least there's going to be a semblance of a conference, number one. Number two, there were thoughts about Oregon State and Washington State defecting as well, which I believe, off the top of my head, I don't think they're going to. And I'm trying to think, were they also trying to lobby to be a part of the Big Ten or maybe even the Big 12 at one point? I don't know if that was the case. Right now, as my memory's going into overdrive, I could have sworn I read something like that, considering they were the last 2 teams standing in that conference, and they figure, well, what the hell? We might as well jump ship too. But it looks like they're probably going to stand pat as of now, considering that the aforementioned teams that are going to leave the Mountain West to go to the Pac-12. So that's a good sign for that conference, at least. But as far as the schedule for college football, it's a little bit intriguing. Now, there aren't any sexy matchups. It's not a Texas-Michigan like last week, or certainly not the schedule that we saw in the opening week. And how I look at this weekend, you do have some interesting contests. And for starters, at noon, you have Alabama going to Wisconsin. Now, Wisconsin, we know they're a team that can play defense but doesn't really score. And Alabama, listen, they're Alabama. Even with a new coach and even with Jalen Milroe, we get it. But who knows? Wisconsin, I'm sure the Badger fan, they're going to come out from all corners there in the cheesehead capital of the United States. Or the dairy capital, I should say. Cheesehead, you think of the Packers. But we would think that could be a game where it could get hostile. And would you be surprised if Wisconsin is hanging tight in the second half, maybe in the third quarter, 16-13? And who knows, when you have a team like that that's hanging around, that's where you can have those upsets. Quite possible. Same for LSU as they go to South Carolina. And these are teams that are ranked, people. Oregon playing Oregon State on the road. Now, we would think Oregon, they'll probably, who knows, when it's all said and done, they'll win 35-6. But again, intriguing because it's an in-state rival game. And we have another one of those games on the docket as well with Utah and Utah State. Now, chances are there'll probably be blowouts when it's all said and done. But would you be shocked that if the Utes go into Utah State and they lay a big giant deuce there at midfield? Same for the Ducks when they go play Oregon State. Could you see them faltering and tripping up, thinking that, and usually this is a game that's played later on, but because Oregon's now part of the Big Ten, this isn't a game that you're going to see through the Thanksgiving weekend. So now you have those two teams going at it. Notre Dame trying to lick their chops from what happened there the other day against Northern Illinois. They're going to play Purdue. Now, of course, Purdue, a team that a lot of people are going to think that they're going to pull off the upset, but they're certainly maybe, dare I even say, stiffer competition than the Huskies of Northern Illinois. I don't know, but stranger things have happened. And then you have Georgia going to Kentucky, which to me, you would think Georgia, they should go in there, steamroll, and be on that team that's going to have that mission-like focus to get themselves back to the playoff and try to win a title that they've done a couple of years back. But could Kentucky be game and maybe be in this game come third quarter, or will it be over by midway through the second quarter where that's it? Kentucky doesn't even have a shot. So that's why I look at the schedule. All right, it's not eye-popping. It's not, ooh, wow, this is a game that I'm going to look at. I know Boston College is playing Mizzou, two teams that are ranked in the top 25, so maybe that's another game you want to pay attention to. But overall, nothing really to sneeze at, but at the same time, you are going to keep a watchful eye over some of these games to see how they play out, because with the way college football has gone off to this start, especially last week when you saw what happened with Michigan. All right, they played Texas, which obviously they're going to be a team that's going to fight for a championship when it's all said and done. And then Utah, ranked 12th, who knows, maybe they're going to be a part of the playoff mix as we get deeper into the season. But this is what college football is. We're going to have to pay attention to those teams that are on the fringe or those teams that are right there in the mix, whether it is Oregon or Utah. And if they lose a game like this here in only the third week of the season, of course, this is going to be big. Now, granted, they will still have some flexibility to possibly lose another game. But if you lose a game now, then you have no margin for error from here on out, even if you do lose two games, because who's lurking or laying in the weeds from the 13 to 20 seed, and they could ascent and move up the rankings to where they may knock one of those two teams out, especially if they have one loss on their ledger. So something to keep in mind as you go into the weekend, and I'll be on top of this come Monday. As far as the NFL, strange week. I know a lot of it early on was the Tyreek Hill incident, and I talked about this on my YouTube channel, not JAYREELZ, and I'll just briefly touch on it now. I get it that Tyreek Hill is not one of nature's noblemen. I get it that he has a checkered past, although it's been quite some time from the incident many years ago, from college, and then, all right, we don't need to unpack that. That was quite a while ago. This wasn't anything that happened recently. But for Hill to not comply and did not want to roll his window down, I'm sure he was perturbed. I'm sure he didn't want to stay there and have to hash it out to police to try to go through the background checks and run his plates and all that, because he had a game to play. And him not rolling down his window, all right, you could certainly put him at fault. But for the officer, and it wasn't even the one officer that was standing over the driver door and window, it was the one to the right who just barged on through, opened the door, and dragged him out of the car And you could hear Tyreek Hill saying, hey, I had knee surgery, watch my knee. And he actually was, I don't want to say surprisingly, I was about to say that, but Hill actually acted very well there. He didn't try to resist arrest, and really, what could you arrest him for? What, because he didn't roll out in his window? All right, he did drive, 60 in a 40-mile-an-hour zone. Okay, I'm sure he got a couple of summonses there, but how that officer reacted and how his behavior was just so out of line, to me, that superseded what Hill did. Now, that's not to say that Hill was blameless here. Not at all, but please, that was just inexplicable and even despicable on the officer's part, and even some of the things that he had said toward Hill, not trying to use race and saying, well, hey, I'm, the same color and blah, 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 and nobody gets any breaks. And I'm paraphrasing here. Just a terrible job. And even Tyreek Hill mentioned, I believe in his press conference yesterday, how he does want to get the cop fired, and even Drew Rosenhaus, his agent, is trying to employ the same stance to make sure that this cop is not on the force, and he should at least be suspended without pay, because that was just, come on. I mean, that was just inexcusable from what he did on his standpoint. But for Tyreek Hill to then come out and say that he just didn't want to make a scene by rolling his window down, and the first video that I had seen prior to the body cam of the police officer was somebody driving by in their car on their cell phone and saying, oh, wow, look, that's Tyreek Hill got pulled over. Now, this is before he got pulled out of the car. And the reason why he didn't want to have his windows down is because he didn't want to make a scene where, all right, Tyreek Hill is getting pulled over. Now, all right, that was his explanation. We can understand that. He probably should have maybe said that to the cop. But then again, and that was the other thing about how he behaved, Tyreek Hill, he didn't even come out to do a name drop to say, hey, do you know who I am? I'm Tyreek Hill. He didn't even do that. So I have to give him credit for that. So, and then you had Calais Campbell and Jonnu Smith also driving by and standing off to the side trying to see what's going on, and the officer didn't want to hear about it and just all this nonsense. I mean, just a terrible job by the officer, and thankfully it wasn't any worse than that. And we hear Tyreek Hill saying, well, what if I wasn't Tyreek Hill? And even then, he didn't come out to say that, hey, I'm Tyreek Hill. Can we stop this here? Just give me a ticket so I can be on my way. So that's the scenario there with that incident. And then you have now Deshaun Watson, another accusation of alleged sexual assault, where in 2020, meeting a girl, I believe through, I don't know if it was social media, whatever, where instead of meeting in a public place, she invited him over to her apartment for dinner, and then one thing led to another. And it didn't even one thing led to another. It's just that the behavior of Watson, although he vehemently denied it, he and his attorney, but you have to dredge all that up again with the masseuses and the therapist, etc., from a few years back where he got suspended. We all know that story. And now you have this crop up again on top of his performance there on Sunday against the Cowboys, the 0-1 start, etc., as they get set to play Jacksonville this weekend. So yeah, another crazy start for the NFL off the field. But with what's happening on the field tonight, you have Buffalo and Miami. I don't like it, it's a Thursday night game, but this is what happens when you have to feed the beast that is the impenetrable shield of the NFL. You can't give them Arizona and the Rams, who are playing on Sunday. You can't give them that game. You got to give them something of note. You got to give them something that the people are going to want to go to on a Thursday night to say, oh, wait, Bills in Miami? Oh, yeah, let's turn that on. Let's see what's happening there. So that's not going to be the case for at least these first few games. Although the Sunday night game, to me, Chicago at Houston, I get it's going to be dubbed Caleb Williams against C.J. Stroud, but not in love with that game. But to kick off week 2, very good game. Actually, I'm sure the Dolphins, they're going to have revenge on their mind, knowing that they had a 2.5-game lead in the division heading into the final few games of last year's regular season. And then we all know what happened there in Miami, the final game of the season, where the Bills prevailed and won the division, where if the Dolphins would have won, they would have won the division and had a 2 seed and at least have 2 games hosted in their building. But as we all know, they went to Kansas City, and dare I even need to say more, we know the fate of the Dolphins at that point. But a good game tonight. Bills riding high, the hand of Josh Allen, the left hand. Obviously, he's going to play. How that's going to affect him taking balls under center, snaps under center, and what that's going to be like. To me, this is more about the Dolphins tonight. They need to win this game. They don't want to be a game and a half behind in the standings, and they're already going to have 2 games on their home schedule off the docket because with the way the schedule is this year, the AFC has the extra road game because the NFC has it with the imbalanced schedule of the games, 17 games, of course. So with the 2 games already in their back pocket, the rest of their schedule, they're going to have to go 9 on the road and then 6 at home. So to get this game is going to be imperative for them. So with Tua and with Tyreek and Raheem Mostert, I read something that, let me just double check with him. Mostert, I don't know if he's unavailable to play in the game tomorrow night, or excuse me, tonight. So let me see if I can pull up Mostert here. Mostert, I don't know what's going to be his deal, but that would be a significant loss for the Dolphins if he's not going to play tonight. So that's going to headline week 2. I think the Bills are probably going to win, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Dolphins win. And you know who I could think that the Dolphins will probably come out of the gate flying and maybe hang on to win a game when it's all said and done. But let's see, Mostert, as I'm pulling this up here, if you're watching on YouTube, I still don't have it. Look, I'm scrolling. Oh, yeah, so he's out for the game. And even the other running back, Devon Achane, he's a game-time call. So you're already going to have your backfield compromised where who even knows what the third-string running back is. And let me see if I can pull him up real quick. But the Dolphins right now, it looks like they're going to do a lot of their attack through the air, a lot of screens, Waddle, Hill, the tight end, etc. So, you know what? Maybe I'll even take Buffalo here because if it's going to be a scenario where they can't run the ball and they're going to have Tua in 3rd and longs, that's not going to bode well, despite the fact that the Bills are also compromised on the defensive end without having their key guy and one Matt Milano there anchoring their linebackers. So the rest of the schedule there in the NFL for a week number 2. Talked about the Sunday night game, Chicago-Houston, which I'm not in love with, as you know. But here are your games of note. 1 o'clock, New Orleans-Dallas. Not a bad game considering what New Orleans did. I understand Carolina, but okay. Tampa-Detroit, a rematch of the division round. And that's going to be a big game for Tampa because they're going to want to get a leg up there. They'll be 2-0 in the season, and also with tiebreakers down the road, especially if Tampa wins the division, and same for Detroit. They could possibly end up in a tiebreaker scenario, even though Detroit, a lot of people expect them to be 1 or 2 when it's all said and done, so we'll see. Indianapolis at Green Bay. Malik Willis is your quarterback with the quarterback Jordan Love on the shelf with the sprained MCL. Could be 4 weeks, could be 2. We'll have to wait and see. Jets at Tennessee. Jets were pathetic there the other night. And their defense, they couldn't stop a nosebleed. 8 possessions straight for the Niner offense, and that's without Christian McCaffrey. Seriously? No McCaffrey. Brandon Ayuk, who came 5 days to the facility to start practicing, and then Trent Williams, who was on an IV partway through the game, and the Jets, they weren't able to slow down that offense in the bit where Jordan Mason, undrafted, had 147 yards, a touchdown on 28 carries. I mean, seriously? Jet defense? What happened there? So that's a big game for them against Tennessee. So I have to keep that in mind. San Francisco, Minnesota, Seattle, New England, Giants at Washington. So that's big for the Giants. Let's see what's going to happen there. Chargers at Carolina, Jacksonville hosting Cleveland, and then you have Vegas and Baltimore. That's your 1 o'clock slate. Only 3 4 o'clock games. The highlight being Cincinnati and Kansas City. Let's see if they could somehow be competitive in this game. I'm sure a lot of people are going to pick Kansas City considering what the Bengals did in their opener against let's face it, a very lackluster offense in New England. Pittsburgh at Denver, where you're going to have Justin Fields starting at quarterback. And then LA at Arizona is your 4 o'clock game. Your Monday night is Atlanta at Philadelphia. That's a big game for Atlanta. They need to win because guess who comes to town after that? The Chiefs. So they could be staring at 0-3, especially if they lose here on Monday night to the Eagles. And besides that, NFL, it's a discuss. Yes, one thing I didn't discuss was my Tom Brady assessment, and I'll say this in 10 seconds or less, with the game against the Browns. He was solid, not spectacular. His voice doesn't really cut through as well as you'd like. I understand that's nothing that he could do about it. But a lot of people have been pounding on him. I'm not going to do that. He was good. He was solid. But it's only one game. Let's see where he goes from there. And then lastly, I'm only bringing this up because he just fought 4 months ago as I put on my boxing gloves. Ready for this, people? He fought 4 months ago against Jaime Munguia. and won, I believe, a unanimous decision. For Canelo Alvarez, as he continues his legend, what is he, 61-2-2. He's fighting Edgar Berlanga in the T-Mobile Arena out in Vegas Saturday night. His 8th defense of the super middleweight title, and that's the only reason why I bring it up. Am I going to watch? I don't know. Maybe I'll turn it on. Maybe I'll see. I know it's pay-per-view, but I'll just check it out. I haven't really followed Canelo that much. Yeah, obviously if he's going to be on the card, you have to pay attention, despite the fact that boxing is literally on life support. But maybe I'll tune in. I don't even know what Berlanga's career record is. Let me see if I could bring this up on the computer here real quick. I don't even know if he's a guy that we could deem a stellar opponent. He is 27 years of age. Berlanga's record, 6-1. All right, so he does have a height advantage. This doesn't even give me anything. Well, Berlanga, I've never heard of the guy if he fell on me. Now, he's born in Brooklyn, as I see here. All right, so that's a start. So he's from here, Puerto Rican descent, 22 wins, 17 by knockout. I don't even see his losses. What is his win-loss record? So let's see. Is he going to be a guy that is going to be pumped up, ready to go, and maybe could go in there and shock the world? He had an ear-biting incident. All right, I guess he tried to get in his inner Mike Tyson. I don't know. Well, he's 22-0. All right, because the way they have this here is just weird. 22-0, 17 by knockout. Who has he fought? That's what I got to ask. And just based on what I see here, nothing of note. So he's heading into the deep end of the pool. Does he have a shot? Maybe. Who knows? But I'll just leave it at that. Let's see how this all unfolds. I'll get to see Berlanga up close and personal, considering he's a local kid, Puerto Rican as well. And will he even do well in the ring? Who knows? But you would think Canelo, excuse me. I was saying Canelo as Canelo and Alvarez together. You would think he's going to be a heavy favorite, and chances are he probably will win unanimously when it's all said and done. That'll do it, my good people. Another episode of the books, as always. Thank you so much for stopping by, carving out precious time out of your day to listen to what it is I have to say about what goes on in the world of sports. If you haven't done so, as always, subscribe, rate, review, subscribe, rate, review, people. I'm all tongue-tied here as I wrap up. As I mentioned at the top, please, Apple, Spotify, JAYREELZ.com, of course, on YouTube, at JAYREELZ. Any questions, comments, or suggestions, hit me up at the following: Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, The JAYREELZ Podcast, Twitter, X, JAYREELZ1, just a number, the old-fashioned way, The JAYREELZ Podcast at gmail.com. I'll be more than happy to follow up with any queries that you may have, because whether you do or do not know, this is what I love to do, people. Going strong 7 months, trying to blaze a path here as a guy who's doing what he loves 24/7, putting out content and just talking about what it is that since birth that I've been spewing for 5.5 decades with nothing but passion, fire, fury, energy, with my thoughts, opinions, critiques, praise, analysis, feelings on anything and everything that happens on the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the JAYREELZ Podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx to South Beach to South Central to South Pacific and all points beyond, peace, love, and God bless everybody. And until next time on the JAYREELZ Podcast, on the flip, baby.